Good Monday! We're now on the second week of Season 2, and I think we have a good feel of what dungeons are easy and hard. Let's start as usual with the 3 tech talks. Just like last week, we're still kind of at the start of the season, so these tips aren't super amazing. The first is one you might have come across over your runs, because it's fairly common. This one is to do with Blessing of Freedom or Tiger's Lust. Both these abilities, belonging to Paladin and Monk respectively, removes all snare effects. Because of this, you can use it to dispel entangling. When entangling appears on your feet, you can cast Blessing of Freedom or Tiger's Lust and it will be gone immediately. Note that Paladins can pre-cast Blessing of Freedom, as it's a persistent effect, but the snare removal effect of Tiger's Lust only happens on the first tick of the ability. In a similar vein, you can use Blessing of Freedom or Tiger's Lust to dispel Blackout Barrel in Freehold. On the second boss in Freehold, once in a while, the boss might throw a barrel on a random player. That player would be disoriented until the barrel's broken. If you use Tiger's Lust or Blessing of Freedom on the player, they'll be broken out instantly. This is very handy, as the player will likely need to be broken out quickly so that they can avoid Eudora's Conal Blasts. That's a 2-in-1 tip for free. The next one is in Halls of Infusion, in the gauntlet before the last boss. It should be no secret by now that you can hide from the incoming waves by standing right behind those little pillars. What may not be quite as common knowledge is that not only are there pillars in the middle of the path, pillars also exist occasionally to either side of the middle. You can use these pillars to line of sight in case you can't get to the middle fast enough. A handy tip to know if you're ever caught in a bad position. Of course, you don't want to stand behind there all the time, as you are line of sighted, so you can't cast abilities on enemies in front of you. And finally, the last tech talk is not so much a tech, it's more of a mechanic that you need to watch out for. It's also in Halls of Infusion, but this one's to do with the dragons. In Mythic Plus, there's only one type of dragon in this dungeon, the Ice Dragon. They have since removed all other dragons from this dungeon. The Ice Dragon has a group-wide damage ability, called Deep Chill, which applies a slow and does a lot of damage over a short duration to every player. Well, in high fortified keys, this is a lot of damage that you really don't want to take if you don't have to. I cannot in good conscience recommend any group to do this dungeon at a reasonable level without a priest in their group, because priests can mass dispel that debuff off the entire party. And because Greater Mass Dispel's cooldown is so short, they are able to mass dispel every Deep Chill. Seriously, if you're making a group for Halls of Infusion and you don't take a priest, be prepared for several deaths in that area. And that's it for the tech, and now we jump into the changes for the week. There aren't nearly as many changes this week as compared to last week, but there are still a considerable number of changes. Let's try to do this chronologically. The first change of the week happened to Dargrul, the last boss of Niltharion's lair. Dargrul is quite infamous for his significant heal requirement, and this nerf seems to aim to reduce that. Flame Gout now does 15% less damage and damages 2 players every 5 seconds rather than 3 seconds. This is still a lot of damage to the party, but significantly less. Magma Breaker from the boss, where he does damage when he moves, had its damage reduced by 15%, and its damage variance removed. I have not a single idea what damage variance means. If my assumption is correct, damage variance means just variance in damage, and who in their right mind would ever think that's a good idea? In my opinion, randomness should be minimized in Mythic Plus. Next is a considerable amount of changes to Brackenhide Hollow and Halls of Infusion. I'll put them on screen, but there are a few highlights. For one, Treemouth was nerfed substantially. He has less health, his Grasping Vines pull slower, and has a much better defined Telegraph. Treemouth casts his abilities less frequently, and I think most importantly, Treemouth no longer casts spells or abilities while consuming a player. This alleviates the biggest issue with this boss, which was that he would spit, spawning slimes while somebody was inside. And if the slimes died on the boss, the explosions from the slimes will kill the player inside. Treemouth is now significantly easier than he was before. As for Halls of Infusion, a few very nice quality of life changes were made. Containment Apparatus's Containment Beam now does 15% less damage, which is great. Crashing Tsunami now moves slower and does less damage. I think that's the waves that appear on the gauntlet before the last boss. The safe spots behind the pillars are now a bit longer, and these next two are pretty big. Refreshing Tides, a heal ability from one of the mobs, can now be interrupted, and taking one of the shortcuts now gives you a 200% movement speed buff, which I think is a fantastic change. Not too dissimilar from the one we saw for Vortex Pinnacle just last week. Then after that, even more nerfs. And don't worry, there's going to be a lot more after that too. There are quite a few changes to a lot of the dungeons, but I'll mention the highlights. Sentinel Talandris, the third boss in Uldaman, now no longer targets the same player with Earthen Shards twice, which is great. Altyrus, the second boss in Vortex Pinnacle, received a considerable nerf. Biting Cold, the persistent rot damage throughout the fight, had its damage reduced by 25%. Twisting Winds, which I think are the tornadoes you walk into to go up, also had its damage reduced by 25%. Then the next set of changes, several boss abilities that previously targeted pets no longer target them. I'm sure some of you who play pet classes might have noticed that on some boss fights your pet just dies for no reason. Well, hopefully this should alleviate that. Then another set of minor nerfs for Brackenhide Hollow. The Rotbow Stalker is actually quite a dangerous mob. They had their scented meat damage reduced, both the direct damage and the periodic damage. But I would still not pull these guys on fortified weeks, because their bleed just does so much damage. It's unreal. Very on topic with this week's Tech Talk, in Halls of Infusion, the Proto-Dragon's Deep Chill was also nerfed by 20%. And even with that 20% nerf, I still think it does too much damage. Bring a priest. And finally, for this set of changes, you might have noticed in Neltharion's Lair at the start, those crawlers actually bolstered. That's pretty insane because there's like 20 of those guys in that first pull. Well, fortunately, they were quickly patched. We're finally here at the last set of dungeon changes for the week. In Brackenhide Hollow, the gnolls no longer bolster, which is fantastic because in the last area before the last boss, there are 2 packs that contain these mobs, and there were like 5 of them, and they would die really quickly, bolster the elites around it, and one-shot my tank. That is not fun. And the other change is to Halls of Infusion. This one might not be so familiar if you don't know what it's talking about. Earlier this week, it was found that if you went left in Halls of Infusion on Mythic 0, picked up the Immortality buff, and started a Keystone, you would retain the Immortality buff for the Keystone. This is basically a free cheat death for your run. Well, Blizzard put a quick stop to this, with the buff now dropping when you start the Keystone. I do consider this an exploit, and I would not have shared this in my Tech Talk, as I do not like sharing exploits. Okay, and the last thing to share this week on the updates is a 10.1.5 set of patch notes. I won't go through all of it, but there seems to be quite a few changes to Balance Druid and Holy Paladins. There was, however, a significant change to several classes. This change affects classes with abilities that grant healing based on damage done. So, Druid's Nature's Vigil, Shaman's Ancestral Guidance, and Shadow Priest Vampiric Embrace. Basically, they were all pretty heavily nerfed, with I think Shaman getting the worst of it all. I say that because Ancestral Guidance now only produces heals based on single target damage dealt, and I'm not sure Enhancement Shaman does a significant amount of single target damage. Most of their damage is multi-target. For the purpose of Ancestral Guidance, duplicated abilities do not count as single target. So, for example, the duplicated lightning bolts you get from Primordial Wave do not trigger Ancestral Guidance. It is quite a significant healing loss. Blizzard cites that they don't want hybrid DPS to contribute too much to group healing, which is unfortunate for the classes that have these abilities, but this seems to be the vision Blizzard has for Mythic Plus. So unfortunately, we'll have to try to adapt to this change. And that concludes the update section, and now we go to the section about me. It has been still quite an eventful week, and I think I play a bit more than I should be. This week, with amazing luck from the raid drops, I managed to get my 4-piece on my Fire Mage. And I have to say, it is fairly chaotic trying to keep track of all the things Fire Mage has. Pyroclasm, Sun King's Blessing, Blastmaster, and now the new Phoenix Flame charges. It's a lot, and if you're new to Fire Mage, it might just take your head for a spin. There is a good reason why mages are just generally super rare, and I hope the changes coming up in 10.1.5 alleviate a lot of these issues. A class that does not have issues is Shadow Priest. Man, those guys are doing so much damage. I don't get how they can do so much damage, provide insane off-healing with Vampiric Embrace, and give another player PI. They are so unbelievably busted right now, I cannot imagine they won't receive a nerf in the next month. Not to mention, Disease Dispel is extremely valuable, Mass Dispel is absurdly strong this season, and Dominate Mind has its uses here and there. I use it all the time on my Discipline Priest. Speaking of Discipline Priest is performing admirably. Several top groups use a Discipline Priest to push keys. They do good damage, they have good group healing, and they provide PI. And let's not forget Mass Dispel. There seems to be a significant need for priests this season with Mass Dispel. How fortunate we are that priests are actually good this season, that we're taking one because of their utility and their damage and not just their utility. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? I think priests deserve some time in the sunlight. They've been pretty poor generally over the past few patches. Except Holy Priest. Holy Priests are always good, because their throughput is just amazing. Anyway, on to the next topic, Aberrus. What do I think of the new raid? Well, it's pretty easy. I think part of it is that we have good gear. Our eye level at the start of the season is significantly higher than it was between Shadowlands and the first season of Dragonflight. But it does feel that mechanically the first 7 or so bosses are quite easy. Maybe a little too easy, I'm not too sure. It's at this point you must ask yourself, what are you looking for in a raid? Do you want everything to be hard? Do you want the first few to be easy and the last few to be hard? Do you want it to be easy all the way? I think part of what makes the bosses so easy this season is that they don't last very long. Even Mythic Sarkareth is a sub 10-minute fight. The longer the fight goes, usually the harder it is. I am personally a fan of shorter fights. I don't like it when the fight drags on for too long, especially when the important mechanics come in later on, as you just kind of waste time clearing the first few parts of the fight with ease and progressing the last phase slowly. I think Blizzard also doesn't like super long fights. They normally leave the long fights for the last boss, so Sylvanas, Jailer, even Razageth, all over 10 minutes and take forever to progress. Maybe this is just a new way Blizzard wants to do their raids. Shorter bosses, quicker fights. That said, it does feel tuning was a bit poor this season. I'm sure with the data they've collected this season, they'll do a better job next season. That was quite the rant, but that's all for this week. If you liked this video, be sure to leave a like or subscribe, and I'll catch you in my next weekly WoW recap.